as the Chief Executive Officer of the Richmond. My name is Steve Nesmith. I'm honored to serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Richmond Redevelopment and Housing Authority under the leadership of Bill Johnson, the Chairman of the Board, and all of the other members of the Board of Commissioners. I want to thank you for the opportunity to bring these remarks about an exciting opportunity for the residents of Gilpin. The redevelopment of one of the oldest public housing infrastructures from Miami all the way up to New Hampshire, and some would say Vermont. And to do this, and that is to execute on what we believe is the implementation segment now of this redevelopment effort, we want to do something that is important, that is to leverage RRHA's 501c3 nonprofit called the Richmond Development Corporation, which is the redevelopment arm of RRHA. It is wholly owned by RRHA and thereby has accountability and oversight by RRHA Board of Commissioners. I want to say we want to leverage this nonprofit to raise revenue for the redevelopment of Gilpin. It is important to note that people have come before you, you've heard in the news, and you've seen on social media, and I've talked to some reporters who said that they actually were willing to write a retraction. The RDC is not a corporation. The RDC is not a private entity. There is one immutable truth, and that is we cannot change, that cannot be changed or altered. And that is long before the current leadership in Washington, D.C., the federal government had been reducing drastically the funding for traditional public housing. And I know that firsthand because I worked in Washington, D.C. for many years, representing cities trying to get funding for public housing. Faced with this reality, all public housing authorities across the country and here in the Commonwealth of Virginia have leveraged its 501c3 nonprofit to advance redevelopment of its public housing. Why? Because there's not enough funding at the federal, state, or city level. That two chairmen of the RRHA told me recently that RRHA should have leveraged the RDC long ago, but there was not the expertise at the CEO level and among senior management. But we have that now. In fact, I have a bunch of all-American experts, the dream team here that I have recruited, and I'm lucky to serve with them. They have the expertise. I have to admit that in coming forward and talking about the Richmond Development Corporation, we did not do a good enough job of bringing in our communication efforts and bringing more clarity and speaking more thoroughly and in plain terms about our proposal and what we were seeking to achieve with the RDC. There are some, however, who would like, I think, unfortunately, to let the status quo linger on. But that's not an option for Gilpin residents. I do talk to Gilpin residents every single day. I talk to Gilpin residents on Saturdays, on Sundays. I talk to them all the time, and they tell me that's not an option for them to linger in the status quo. And that is because they say in Gilpin, they don't want to live in cinder block and concrete. That's inhumane in my mind. And our proposal to do a phased transfer of portions of Gilpin. There are 10 phases of Gilpin. We're not proposing of just transferring all 781 units of public housing at one time into the RDC. No, we're not doing that. as some have said, a phased development. Our redevelopment efforts of Gilpin, furthermore, is not privatization. And again, as I said earlier, some reporters have apologized and said, after having explained to them, they understand this is not a privatization effort. RDC is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization. Thus, it is not a private company in the typical sense of a private company that is a for-profit entity whose primary mission is to raise profits for their shareholders and their partners. Rather, the RDC primary mission is to promote social cause, to provide the public benefit, and to generate opportunities for those in the community. You've heard a lot about there's lack thereof of oversight and accountability with the RDC. Again, if you say something enough times, people will begin believing you. There is oversight and accountability. Let me tell you what it is. The Board of Commissioners, in their wisdom, decided and they passed a resolution that they have a member of the Board of Commissioners on the RDC board. Why? For accountability, oversight. That is also the Board of Commissioners passed a resolution mandating that all actions taken by the RDC board must come back to the Board of Commissioners for a final vote. That's called oversight. Now you might ask this, why now? Why now? Well, why should we move for a vote right now as we are talking with our board? And that is, given the federal environment of the volatility, of the changes in funding that we're all aware of, it is imperative that RRHA take the strategic steps to ensure that tenant protection vouchers are available to aid Gilpin households during the relocation efforts. There is an urgency of now to submit an RRHA request for authorization for tenant protection vouchers for Gilpin residents. And you may ask how? Well, when RRHA uses the RDC to redevelop each phase of Gilpin, RRHA, watch this, RRHA will continue to own the land. There have been misfacts and false rumors in the media and other places and TV that the phase transfer of Gilpin into the RDC, that it will be no longer owned by RRHA. That is factually incorrect. The phase transfer by way of a ground lease, RRHA will have title. Anyone who understands real estate, if you have title, you are the owner. So RRHA will remain the owner in public trust. Just like we've done here with Gilpin Court redevelopment. RRHA have also embedded in the redevelopment agreement for Gilpin what is called the Tenant Bill of Rights. And some of you on City Council know about it because many of you, with President Nouveau and others, have made sure that the Tenant Bill of Rights are enshrined in any agreement, redevelopment agreement, that ensures that any current resident who wants to return to Gilpin can return. That's embedded in the agreements, and I've made sure that's in there. In the meantime, tenant protection vouchers will ensure that families will continue to receive affordable housing assistance. Community engagement. Some have talked about that. Well, RRHA undertook a 15-month planning effort under a grant from HUD, which culminated in December 2023. Gilpin residents, along with other community stakeholders, many who come up to this microphone, Gilpin Concerned residents and others, many community resident forums, more than a year. And in that process, the Gilpin residents' voices were heard. And at the end of that, there was created a 179-page document, which is a planning document for Gilpin, which HUD accepted. That plan laid out the desires of not RRHA, but what the residents said they wanted and other stakeholders in Gilpin said they wanted for the new Gilpin community. Now we're in the implementation plan is underway. RRHA recognized that it needs to enhance our community and resident engagement. Again, we should have done a better job of explaining what is the RDC, how it's made up, and how it will be used as a tool for engagement. I know that because when I played professional basketball, I didn't play every game well. In this particular instance here, we did not do a good job of communicating, but we're going to do that. We're going to go forward the next several weeks, and we're going to hold a series, 3 of them, really large community engagement meetings in the community, and get resident engagement and to explain what the RDC is. To be clear, the redevelopment of Gilpin is going to happen. The question before us is, will we be able to leverage and to get additional funding because there's not enough funding from the federal, state, and local level? We've already signed agreements for the redevelopment, legal agreements, redevelopment of Gilpin. The question before all of us, not just the board, but all of us, is will we have enough money, funds, to get that done? Will we have tenant protection vouchers for the residents? Financing tools. RHA will explore a variety of financing tools to include long-term housing tax credits, historic tax credits, city and state funding, and rental assistance demonstration, so-called RAD. However, with RAD, with that process, it does not provide for vouchers for residents for relocation, but we will explore all avenues. Public-private partnerships are essential. One of the things in closing, what I did, which has never been done before, is I ensured in the Gilpin development that RRHA is the partner in this development. So typically you see a private developer coming in being more of the owner. For the first time in the written agreement that we have, and we drug the developer with us, we are the minority owner, minority partner in this development, first of its kind, and we are very proud of that. In closing, we recognize that in these redevelopment efforts, we are always resident focused and trying to create what is at the heart of what our mission is, and that is rebuilding community and changing lives. And we look forward to collaborating with each member of City Council, the mayor, and all stakeholders that we try to create a brighter future for our residents. I'll accept any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nesmith.
Thank you, Mr. Nesmith. Appreciate the presentation. You've mentioned in several statements that communications has not been as effective as perhaps it could have been or should have been. Also, the fact that the plan for the redevelopment was completed in 2023, which gives us a year, I don't know what month in 23, but I'm going to give you a benefit of December. So we're talking 18 months, perhaps. And, you know, communication is extremely important, especially when you're speaking to residents that have lived in a location for as long as residents have lived in Gilpin. And the plan of redevelopment of Gibson housing community is quite old in the planning process. It's been something that's been going on, and several different plans have been put together. So after a while, it can get kind of complicated and very confusing for residents to be absolutely sure that their interest is being protected. And so I think that's extremely important. So I do hope that these 3 community engagement meetings that you are having, that you have a schedule for those so that we can, here at City Hall, will know what that schedule is as well, so we can make sure that we do our part to ensure that we are engaged in that discussion and understand exactly what that discussion is. I understand your presentation as it relates to the development model. I understand the significance of having a not-for-profit entity as a part of your organization to leverage funding and to provide an opportunity for that development to take place. And the RDC is not new to the Housing Authority. It has been an arm that has been exercised in years past. And most recently, it has not been, and I recall your efforts to put that back into a operational status. Some of the questions that the community is raising as it relates to representation on the board. I don't know that this is a decision that the council needs to be engaged in one way or the other necessarily, but I honor the request that is the residents are making. I do feel like open transparency sometimes work very well, and who that representative, if such a representative, is the decision of the board to make that decision. That would be something that would be valuable. I guess the question as it relates to the representation on Richmond RDC from the board, the member that is serving on the board, we have representatives on your board, your governance board, that are also representatives of the Housing Tenant Council. And so my question is whether or not the representative on the RDC is one of the representatives of the Tenant Council.
Right. So to answer your question, I may answer it in the reverse, if I may. First, at the heart of what we do, as I say, is that we listen to residents, because that's who we serve at the end of the day. Without them, we don't exist. And we've listened to them. And what I have and my team, what we've have been, we're going to come back and make some decisions. I do believe that we should seriously consider having residents represented in some way on the RDC board. I do believe that. I think it should in some way mirror what you have on what we have on the board of commissioners. So we're going to meet. I had to take that to the board of commissioners again, because everything we do in the RDC, it has to be approved by the board of commissioners. Again, oversight and accountability, I said earlier. So that is something that we're seriously going to consider, Councilman Robinson, and I think we're going to make that decision real soon, because I think it's important.
Okay, so the second question that I had,
and the person who is currently on is not, to your question you had, is not one of our resident members, but we believe, and I do believe, I can tell you now that, again, as I just said, that resident voice on the RDC board, I think it's important. We just got to figure that out. We'll be bringing that actually to our board, maybe even as early as tomorrow.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yeah.
The second question that I had is, you mentioned 3 community engagement meetings, and the dates for those meetings. If you don't have them there, if we can get those dates of that meeting, and council can be extended an invitation of choice to be a part of those community meetings. And that way we can look at your proposed agenda for those meetings. And if there are other subject matters that we think are important to be a part of those meetings, we would like to give you advice on such, respecting the fact that you have a board that makes those decisions. But just in the interest of public hearings and public comments, and if there's something that we feel that would be value added, that we would make those recommendations based on those 3 meetings that you're planning to have.
Absolutely, and Councilwoman Robinson, we are seeking to have those meetings confirmed by this Friday. It may slip into early next week, but our goal is this Friday is to have them confirmed. We do have a tentative location, but we need to firm all that up. So we will definitely let every member of the council know.
So last question, as it relates to the public-private partnership, the land stays in the ownership control of the Board of Commissions for the Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority. Your private public partnership and the development itself. If you could provide us information on what is being proposed to be developed in each phase, so that we can appreciate the level of public housing, the level of workforce or marketing house, whatever that split is. If you can provide us that detailed information for each one of those phases and a proposed timeline that you're looking at for those, that would be extremely helpful as well. And you spoke to the fact of getting the vouchers. I would assume that if you could provide us detailed information on the number of vouchers that you are proposing to achieve, and if you are aware at this stage in your development of what level of vouchers you're going to be attempting to achieve for all phases, and the timeline of the total development. One of the things that is very concerning is that historically, our redevelopment of our housing authority managed communities take entirely too long. No question about it. I mean, they cost a lot of money. Housing costs a lot of money, period. But they do take too long. And so if we could have a view into that window, that would be a conversation as well that I would like to have with you as relates to that once I've had an opportunity.
Absolutely.
To see.
And as to our request to HUD in Washington, D.C., there are 781 units in Gilpin and probably about 2,000 families. We would like, HUD gives the funding based on units occupied at the time of application. So we want to go for all of them. So that's one. Two, and I also want to say that the tenant protection vouchers are a separate category of vouchers than our housing choice vouchers. It's a separate category and it's separate funding. But we'll get that information to you. We'll also, as you say, information where we're looking at having some of the development will be locked in for public housing, workforce, and we'll give that all to you. And you hit on an important point about how long it takes. There are 10 phases. We've already done some sort of early financial projections, and we can see that there's going to be gap funding. We already see that. And so one of the things that we are going to be bringing to the fore is an opportunity to speed up. I want to get ahead of myself because we're doing the research, but we got to, as you said, we don't want to be here for another 100 years. So we will hopefully keep our fingers crossed, and we're going to be bringing, hopefully, to the table an opportunity to speed up. That may cut the development time in half, but hold on to that. We're working with some experts, and hopefully we can bring that to Virginia, but that's in the early stages. But we will get those documents about planning and rest. And I also want to say this last, is that we've also have a strategy with Gilpin. It's called a build first strategy, right? I know you and I have had conversation about dislocation and rest. So our build first strategy says we're going to take, 10 phases of redevelopment for Gilpin. So if the first phase, let's say it's 3 buildings, right? We will build first for those folks when that's about, they will go to that. Guess what? It's on the footprint of Gilpin. So it deals with the relocation issue. It's called our build first strategy, and we'll get some of that to you as well. I think we're looking to submit something to our board soon, and obviously we've got to submit them first before we submit it to you. But we do have some preliminary estimation around financing, timelines, and the rest, and we'll get that to you.
Thank you, Mr. Nesbitt, and thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions, and then my colleague, Ms. Lynch, has some questions as well. But thank you for coming. Thank you for following up after last council meeting. One of the questions you named about relocation. And so I know that you said some of what the RAD program or something you named said doesn't support relocation. So do you have a strategy for those that may not qualify for this program? What is the relocation strategy? And then if there is no relocation strategy, what do you plan on doing with those folks who may or may not be able to return? Because I'm feeling like I'm getting kind of like, but like I'm hearing somewhat of like mixed messaging in terms of like that there isn't funding to relocate, but then also we are making sure that everybody, if they want to, can come back. So can you just speak to that a little bit and help us kind of get a clear sense of what that strategy is going to look like and how we are ensuring that folks are not, based off of this process, pushed out or displaced. And I just want to say that, I understand that RRHA is a separate entity and you're doing, the work through the RDC and all that, but the reality of it is those folks who live in all of the big six are Richmond residents first. And so we represent the fact that they are Richmond residents. So a lot of these questions, like as my colleague stated, are not necessarily things that we would have oversight on or things that we would have, we would speak to, but we are speaking to them. It is our due diligence, one, as elected officials to represent every resident in this city. So a lot of these questions are really being formed for how are we taking care of our residents? How are we ensuring that they are not being displaced? And then also, how are we putting the needs of them forward, but also some trust, like how do we rebuild trust? Like we talk about changing lives and all those things, but there's been a rupture. And so how do we also address that? That was a lot, but I'll give you some time to answer the first question and then we can move on.
Yeah, building trust. We've been trying to do that in the last 2 years that I've been here, making sure there's one message. I work with President Marilyn O's at RTO, and she and I often sit down and talk about how the previous administrations, plural, have not done a good job. And I think we've been doing that and turning the corner on that. We will continue to do more. One of the ways we all know that you build trust, as my mom used to say from South Carolina, actions speak louder than words. And so we've been trying to make sure that our actions speak more than what we say. But I'm going to have Ms. Cheryl Hampton, the Senior Vice President for Real Estate Development, to come up and talk about a little bit about that relocation process and answer relate to the vouchers as well. One of the things that we're looking to make sure is that one thing is true, as I said earlier, and I know Councilwoman Lynch was not here, is that we cannot leave these folks in cinder block concrete where they're living. That's inhumane. Okay? And one of the problems we have, even with doing redevelopment, when we have work orders, sometimes it's like getting a Mercedes-Benz engine and putting it in a car that's built in 1930. That capital expense eats at our bottom line. And so we must and have to give the residents of Gilpin and all the big six an opportunity to have a better way of life. And I do appreciate those members of City Council who don't have public housing in their councilman geographic district. It's important because what we do, it does impact the entire city. Ms. Cheryl Hampton, I want to talk a little bit about our voucher, what we're trying to do with relocation. By the way, that's why the public-private partnership is important, because we recognize that government can't do it alone. We're going to come to the table with some private funding for our relocation as well.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Jones, Vice Chair Robertson, Ms. Lynch, and others around the dais. Cheryl Hampton, Senior Vice President for Real Estate Development. I'm going to speak specifically, Ms. Jones, to your question around relocation activities and our strategy. So I just want to say, as it relates to financing tools, RAD is one tool. We're exploring a number of options, but in that, my CEO wanted you to know that with straight RAD, our vouchers, tenant protection vouchers, are not available. That's why we're looking at other options, and that's why we're making the request now for tenant protection vouchers, which they can take that voucher and go anywhere throughout the city, throughout the county, or wherever. Now, specific relocation activities. HUD does require that a PHA, a public housing authority, have a relocation strategy to mitigate displacement. What are some of the things we would do under our strategy and what we're doing now in Creighton and have been doing for the last 2 or 3 years? We assess each family's needs based on number of children, school age, and otherwise, location for jobs and so forth, and ability to travel. We provide some upfront costs for applications. We provide the moving cost and or moving supplies. Our residents have an option, and so they're able to select how they want to receive that assistance. We generally pay for the movers. It is done on the number of bedroom size of their units. And so that's how we work. But we do follow the HUD requirements for relocation.
Then I also want to have the Senior Vice President of Public Housing talk a little bit about the voucher question that was brought up. State your name and who you are. In a proud way.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Corey Franklin. I serve as the Senior Vice President of Affordable Housing for Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority. One question you have asked is regarding the request of tenant protection vouchers and the number of tenant protection vouchers that RRHA can request. So just adding a little bit of color to what Mr. Nesbitt was explaining is that what we will do is we'll do a 2-year look back of the number of occupied units to determine the total number of tenant protection vouchers that we can request back. Now, also, I wanted to just let you guys know that if for whatever reason a resident does not decide to use the tenant protection voucher and they say, please move me to another public housing development, they do have that option. And those tenant protection vouchers will roll up into our regular voucher program, meaning that we can use those vouchers to pull from the waiting list or use those vouchers to create more affordable housing in the method of project-based voucher. So just wanted to add more color to that.
Thank you. And then my other question for you was the Bill of Rights.
Yep.
Did you say that that was created with the tenants, or that is something that was created as a result of Creighton?
Right. So the language of Tenant Bill of Rights, which essentially says that tenants have the right to stay if they want to or to leave. That is already embedded in that language already in the Gilpin Court redevelopment language of the contract. We took that model. We included that the city council and the former mayor agreed to all of you. It is now in the Gilpin Court redevelopment as well. So that empowers the residents to decide what they want to do. And it says they have the right of return if they want to.
And what else is in it? And is it possible that we could get a copy of that?
Yes. We'll get that to you.
Okay. Yeah, we'd love to have a copy of that. My last question is, with the commissioner, RRHA commissioner, how do you maintain commissioner independence if a member of the RDC board includes all of, your employees who report to you? How do you maintain that independence? And then if we could also get who else is actually on the RDC board.
Sure, we'll get to you, everyone who's on the board. It is essentially the most senior members of my team who have real estate and financial expertise. So one of the things that when I decided to uplift and build out the RDC, that issue did come up, and that is around independence. That's why the Board of Commissioners said we must have, for the purposes of accountability, they passed a resolution to make sure a Board of Commissioner sits on the RDC board for accountability purposes.
So you're going to get us the Bill of Rights. You're going to get us who's on the RDC. You also are going to get us a copy of the bill and the relocation strategy?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Lynch?
You know, I got a lot of questions.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So you had mentioned that you had legal documents signed for Gilpin, or you were on the verge of signing for Gilpin. Can you share more about that, where those are in process?
You mean for the redevelopment of Gilpin? Yes, we have already signed the contracts to redevelop Gilpin, which is called the Master Development Agreement. What we have been doing now, we're in the implementation stage. So if you think back to the 179-page document that represented more than a year of those community meetings, those are the voices of the residents of Gilpin. Now the question is, how do we execute it, right? How do we execute their dreams that are on that paper? And again, I will admit, we should have done a better job of explaining what we said. Let's take this creative tool called the RDC that all the other, not all, but majority of the housing authorities of the Commonwealth of Virginia are using to move forward with their development. That's the real question before us. How we use it, what is it, and how would it better? And remember, as we said earlier, there are funding gaps in all the 10 phases of the redevelopment. And the RDC, the nonprofit, again, it's not a corporation, it will allow us to go out and leverage additional funding. RHA, by federal rules, are not allowed to do that, and that's why other housing authorities in the Commonwealth use a nonprofit. So what is before us is how do we now execute on that plan and try to get those tenant protection vouchers and also to leverage funding.
The legal documentation, or the master agreement that you signed, is that with a private developer? Do you have a private developer already committed to doing the development?
Yes, we do. We have a private developer. That whole process that we went through, procurement with a lot of folks that submitted, that was all public. That was all competitive. And we do have that developer's RRHA. It has, I think they were here before. They did, what was in the big building across the street? They have done work here in the past. But in that agreement, Councilwoman Lynch, the good news is that unlike other agreements, Creighton and some others, I brought a different business perspective, having come from not just government, but business. I said, our chairman, Bill Johnson, said, Nestor, I'm tired of people making money off of poor people. That's what he told me. I said, well, I'm gonna do something different. As you know, some of you know, in the NFL, it's called the Rooney Rule, where you got to make sure you have African-American representation in the quarterbacks. What I said is that we're going to take ownership. RHA is going to take ownership under this agreement, under the Master Development Agreement. We are, watch this, as a public entity, 40% owner, kind of like the Diamond District, 40% ownership, the public. Now y'all hearing that for the first time, but now the good news is starting to come out. Yes, the public, RHA, 40%. We're going to be put out a press release about that. That is a big deal. That is a really, really big deal. Let me tell you what else is in that agreement. I negotiated along with the help of my team. And that is, I did not want to put a quota in it because it was going to the Supreme Court and everything else. But it says in there that, and we put this in, it was the RFP that was a long time ago, Councilman Lynch and others, whomever the winning bidders would be, that they would have to reinvest, like banks have to do, reinvest a portion of their profits back into the community. And they would have to have a conversation with the community about what that looks like. If it's a Boys and Girls Club, if it's a job training, that is monumental. That is the first time any agreement in this city, any development has it in them. And that rules because our chairman said he was tired of people making money off of poor people.
So let's dig into that a little bit. So what you just illuminated for us is that we've already signed a master agreement with a private developer who we are going to be a minority landowner in, who is going to make a profit and then be committed to giving a certain percentage of that profit back into the community.
Oh,
So if they are making a profit off of this development, is it a leap to say that they are doing so with a one-for-one replacement, or are they doing it through a mixed income / LIHTC, drawing down LIHTC and all the things you're talking about?
Yes, ma'am. So unpack that a little bit. So first, every development in the United States, and Richmond is no different, there is a profit, but we make sure, as I said, that they get less profit because RHA is a public entity, the public partner are getting some of that as a 40% owner. One, two, there's not one-for-one replacement. So I know that's been out there in the ether a lot. And so the way HUD defines one-to-one replacement, it's not a one-for-one structure, but a one-for-one in that if you want to, you get a voucher and let the tenant decide where they want to stay and go. What I have seen, my experience has been that when someone gets a voucher, they say, I'm not waiting to phase 10. I want to take that voucher and I'm going to go realize my dream now in Churchill, whatever it might be, or another county. And we should allow them, like I was able to get a public housing. You can't say you need to stay in public housing. So when we say one for one, we have to be careful because one of the things we don't want to do, and this is serious, is reconcentrate poverty.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be very careful with that. And so it is a mixed income, and we're also, Councilman Lynch, making sure that there is, locked in for public housing residents to make sure because they have that Bill of Rights. And so it will be mixed income, and we can come back, as you said, and ask what that mix is, and we'll share that with you.
Well, let's use Armstrong Renaissance as an example. Can you share with us how many units are offered in Armstrong Renaissance at for 30% of the AMI and below?
Over at Armstrong?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have those exact numbers. I don't know. Do any of you know the exactness in Armstrong Renaissance? What that mix is in terms of affordability?
So hold on one second, Mr. Nesbitt.
Yeah.
So because we specifically talking about Gilpin, and I know it's all relevant, but like, I think you're slated to come back in July to present for land use, correct?
Sure. I mean, if you like that, that's.
It is. Yeah. Can we get all of that back? Ms. Lynch, is that information we can bring back for the July?
We can bring that back. I mean,
Yeah.
The other thing
Because
that
we
I
still
think
have two other presentations, so I want you to
Okay.
ask your questions before we just start wrapping it up.
the only other well, there's more, but I mean, I think it's also important because you hit on a very important point, and it's the crux of the argument is that when we say one for one, we don't necessarily mean that we're replacing each unit, right? But we want to ensure to protect against displacement that individuals and residents and families that receive a voucher are able to go out on the private market and then find another apartment. Have you been, so the question that I'm about, two questions that are really important data points are, have you been working with the city, and do you know how many landlords currently, how much inventory do we have out there in the region of people who are taking housing choice vouchers? And then two, with tenant protection vouchers, they fall under the same 90-day, you've got 90 days to find said apartment, and you can ask for an extension, but you've got 90 days to find a unit, or else it expires. Now, if you release, hundreds of tenant protection vouchers or housing choice vouchers out there at one time, and the inventory we know is very, very limited, how do you ensure a planful and thoughtful transition for those residents that are going to take those vouchers without them losing it? Because we've seen that happen. So I think that's an important data point. And then, yes, I think, to Councilmember Robertson's point, all of the information about the mix of units, the how you all are actually leveraging the LIHTC credits, and how all of that, the financing, it's wild that all of that has been done through the RDC without it coming back to the board or being publicly discussed yet. But I'm sure that you have the plans and you're going to show us all that information in July.
Sure. So a couple of things, a lot to unpack there. And those are very good questions. So first, when we signed the master development agreement to redevelop Gilpin, it was not through the RTC. it was the traditional way. What we said is that now that the voices of the residents of Gilpin have been heard, how now are we going to execute on that plan? Well, we said then let's use this vehicle called the RRHA, our nonprofit, to go out and leverage funding. On the issue, so that's that. It's a sub one. I'm gonna have 1 second. Corey come up and talk about some of the voucher issues. And I want you to talk, Corey, about what we're doing under our incentive program to incentivize our landlords and our residents, because we do know that is an issue. That is landlords saying, I'm going to take them, because we know, let's be honest, people say, I don't want those people. We know that's an issue all across this country, and Richmond is no different. So I think on some of the voucher issues that you mentioned, and if you want to repeat some of them, you can do that.
So I think what I would like to see happen is for that presentation in July, if you could literally put something together that speaks to all the questions that Ms. Lynch has raised, because they are very valid and important questions, specifically since we're talking about you've already signed an agreement, things are in the works. I think those are, responses to the public that we should be able to have answers to, because we're getting calls, folks are asking us about these things. And I know that, today was supposed to be a follow-up discussion from the last council meeting, and I don't want to, kind of go into another set of presentations, even though they're all relative. I want to be able to make sure that you can put something together that responds to what Ms. Lynch has asked, and be able to put some meat around those questions and not just answer right now because we're asking on the spot. You know what I mean? On the spot.
And if you, Councilman, if you can email those to us, and then we'll answer those with specificity, interest of time. And also, when we're hoping, we're knocking on that the Lord Jesus Christ is willing, probably I think the end of August for Creighton, we're going to be handing out, that's all, it's going to all be affordable. We're going to hope, as Lord Jesus Christ is willing, we're going to be handing out 68 keys in the next phase of Gilpin, all affordable. So that's a blessing.
You mean Creighton or Bill?
I'm sorry, in Creighton.
Okay.
In Creighton.
Yeah.
And so that's just like one of the things that we're doing. And reminder, you all know, and you asked the right question. Again, these things take a lot of money. We're going to try to speed up the time, but there's not enough money to finance and to redevelop public housing. You must have that mix, a certain amount of market rate, but we try to make sure we squeeze and make sure you're guaranteeing enough of public housing there. Then you have what's in affordable, and then you have that market rate. That mix is important in terms of financing, because there's just not enough money to do that anywhere.
Agreed. I think the goal here though is protection, and to ensure that folks are being protected along the way, and that they are being heard, and that we are making sure that we're doing everything we can, whether it's 1 year or 10 years, to ensure that folks are just not being left or overlooked. And so I think that's the beauty about this dialogue that we can continue to have. And I think it should happen publicly so that folks could know what is going on. And so we'll look forward in July, in a presentation on the voucher program, and Ms. Lynch will send an email to us. We'll make sure you get it and be ready to share that next iteration. And again, it's all relative.
Yes, ma'am.
But along with what we've requested, which, again, is the relocation strategy, Bill of Rights, and what else do you ask for? Education plan, and
the meetings, the 3 meetings.
The meetings, the engagement meetings, and what that will entail, and then also
and if you would work with me on the dates, because respectfully, I always have to present to my board before I present to any public body. So work with me on the dates.
We can do that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Again. And I
Richmond Development Corporation. The RDC is not a corporation. The RDC is not a private entity. We're not proposing of just transferring all 781 units of public housing at one time into the RDC. No, we're not doing that, as some has said. This is not a privatization effort. RDC is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization. There is oversight and accountability. Let me tell you what it is. They have a member of the Board of Commissioners on the RDC board. All actions taken by the RDC board must come back to the Board of Commissioners.
I haven't seen any bylaws from the RDC, so I don't know what their board's authority is. Don't really know all of the ramifications for disposing of Gilpin to the RDC. And I am going to argue that the authority does not have control of the RDC.
That's called oversight. The next several weeks, and we're going to hold a series of 3 of them, really large community engagement meetings to explain what the RDC is.
These 3 community engagement meetings that you are having, you have a schedule for those? Some of the questions that the community is raising as it relates to representation on the board, I honor the request that is the residents are making. Open transparency sometimes work very well.
We should seriously consider having residents represented in some way on the RDC board. I think it should in some way mirror what we have on the Board of Commissioners.
The dates for those meetings, if you don't have them there, if we can get those, we would like to give you advice just in the interest of public hearings and public comments. And if there's something that we feel that would be value added.
The reality of it is those folks who live in all of the big 6 are Richmond residents first. It is our due diligence, one, as elected officials to represent every resident in this city.
What we do does impact the entire city. The Tenant Bill of Rights, which essentially says that tenants have the right to stay if they want to or to leave. It is now in the Gilpin Court redevelopment as well.
And what else in it? And is it possible that we could get a copy of that?
Yes, we'll get that to you.
Okay. How do you maintain commissioner independence if a member of the RDC board includes all of, your employees who report to you?
A Board of Commissioners sits on the RDC board. The way HUD defines one-to-one replacement, it's not a one-for-one structure. But a one-for-one in that if you want to, you can get a voucher and let the tenant decide where they want to stay and go.
And in July, if you could literally put something together that speaks to all the questions because they are very valid and important questions. I think those are responses to the public that we should be able to have answers to, because we're getting calls, folks are asking us about these things. And I think it should happen publicly so that folks could know what is going on. And so we'll look forward in July in a presentation and be ready to share that next iteration.